Yeah. All right. So last time we talked about, so this week we talked about paradigms, we talked about claims, and to remind you, we made the, like, if you remember, we talked about the difference between exploratory research and explanatory and predictive research, or that would be, or like claims, and that will be related to descriptive research and inferential research. Um, and so what that means, remember we said if your research is exploring, you're just describing certain realities, the existence or lack thereof of certain phenomena. Um, so you're not explaining why two things come together or why one factor uh, is increasing or decreasing. So that's part of what we call exploratory claims, and that's what we call also descriptive research. So when you have descriptive data, you're just describing, like let's say, the makeup of this your sample, the conditions in which that sample, the samples were in, the time frame, etc. All we call that descriptive research. Whereas if you're doing inferential research, you're inferring from two data points a larger pattern, or what we call a theory. Like there's a relationship, and that actually is a manifestation of a larger thing happening. That is to say, a deeper theory that explains the emergence of those things. Yeah. Um, Only explanatory and predictive research have claims to causality. So remember, if you explain things, that means you're saying A causes B, or that A and B are caused by something else, right? So increase on, so when you say, for example, the increase in mobile phone use is caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So you're saying that's the cause, and that should then show us that outside of the pandemic use, there was not the same frequency of mobile use we see nowadays, right? Um, so that's in causality. Causality means more specifically that you propose that X is the reason Y exists, or like Y's exist if there were multiple variables, or changing, right? So obviously mobile phone use existed before COVID-19, but you say it changed, i.e. increased because of the pandemic, just for one example. So those, when you're doing predictive claim, when you're having predictive claims, or you're having explanatory claims, you would need to have a hypothesis to test. Okay, so hypothesis again, because you're inferring something. That's what hypothesis is. It's only based on your logical conclusion. This proposal is being produced, but it's not extracted from the data directly that you can actually see it. You infer based on the logical and statistical rules. And so when you test those hypotheses and support them, you're hopefully building a larger or like a more meta theory. So let me then explain something. So if that is the case, someone might ask, and actually some of you have asked, how do I propose a hypothesis? So now I am a second year undergraduate student, and I don't know what you guys are talking about when you say hypothesis. So they just come up with it from out of thin air. Like, do I draw from like a bowl and whatever words come out, and then that will constitute hypothesis? What's the deal? That's one. And secondly, do I always need them to conduct research? What if I'm interested in a topic, but I don't really have a hypothesis? I'm going to do that. That leads us to talk about two things: inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. Does anyone Has anyone heard about these two terms before, inductive and deductive, from a science class? Eric, can you tell us what you remember about those two terms, inductive and deductive, to the best of your ability?
Yeah, I don't remember a lot. They're two different ways of reaching a conclusion, I think, and I can't remember, but oh gosh, I think one of them builds on your observations and what you observe, and then the
Mm-hmm.
other is built on existing knowledge, I think. I can't remember.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. That's right. That's exactly right. But you don't remember which one is which. Okay. The two, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like there's two things. So inductive is the first part, where it's solely based on observation. So that's the inductive reasoning. You go out to nature or you observe human communication, and from that you observe in general, and you would start to see some patterns. Something that will emerge. You would see like what you would call a trend, right? That's called inductive reasoning. So based on the observations, you see a trend, then you will propose that trend as, or the theme that you inferred from your observations, as the new hypothesis model, right? They started with no theory whatsoever. You just, if that is possible, but assuming it is possible, no theory, just pure observations, and then you came up with something they would call rules. Well, not even rules, but like, let's say, general principles or theoretical framework that could explain the phenomenon being investigated. So that's inductive. The other one is deductive. So you already have a hypothesis and you want to test it against the facts. So you have a hypothesis about how human or objects or animals or planets, for that matter, would behave. You look at the real data, collect the data, and you test your hypothesis, and then you either confirm or disconfirm your hypothesis. If it's confirmed, you would repeat it with some tweaks, also confirm or unconfirm. Someone with a counter argument would come in and test it against their own data. And so this is how you would get something we call science, like knowledge building above each other. In order to remember, Eric, just remember what the prefixes are. So in Latin and in English, stand for specific, forming a larger entity, right? So you're inducing is like similar to input and intake. So from out, you're getting something into a larger thing, right? So actually, increase is the same, right? So increase, you're increasing the amount of liquid in the cup. So from the outside, from everywhere, you put it into one cup, right? So that's from observation forming a larger theory, right? You think about all the prefixes, all the words that start with N, all the verbs start with. So it's always something adding. D is always something taking out, hence decrease, destruct, decompose, right? You name it. It's always, so there's something larger and you're taking something out of it. So there's a larger theory and you have a specific case. You're saying that theory, I'm taking an explanation from that theory and applying it to my case, right? Hence, it's deductive. The larger theory already exists, that you're taking it to test smaller instances. I hope that's clear. And so in the social sciences, we actually do the two. especially in the empirical paradigm that we talked about. We start with the theory building phase, is called induction, but then conclude with the deductive phase of theory testing. So empirical paradigms, actually, you must have a theory. Eventually, you must have a theory. In reality, when new fields start to emerge, so anthropology, for instance, started only in the 19th century. Same time, like sociology started to emerge and psychology started to emerge. Communication, the field of communication studies, only emerged in the like around the mid of the 20th century, right? People would then just do inductive reasoning research. That is to say, they would observe what's happening, and then they would propose different, like, big theories, right? So we had the two-step model of influence. So when people were observing when early communication researchers were observing how people react to radio shows and political advertising. So they found that based on the radio show, at the time TV was not a big thing, based on the radio show you listened to, people would express the candidate or the party they would vote for. People did not know that, but that leads scholars to propose the two-step theory of influence. That is to say, we don't form our opinions just by observing or like receiving information, but actually those information are usually filtered towards a third party. Something we call an opinion leader. Nowadays, we call influencers that actually help us make sense of the reality, the presented reality, which affects the decision we make. Before that, it was not a thing. So it was only based on observations that they would go to different towns or saloons and they would see what people are discussing. And then they noticed that it's always repeating something that was mentioned in the radio 2 days ago or something like that. So that was like an inductive phase. But ever since then, researchers have been studying that influence and influence theory. What causes influence? You have to have agreement between the source and the audience in order to increase influence. What things predict opinion leadership? What things weaken opinion leadership? That's the deductive phase. So we have a theory, and we want to see if it could be applied to multiple contexts. And if it doesn't work out in different contexts, then why not? So we have to improve that theory. So we will add modifiers, we will add exceptions, we will add additional rules, right? We have a theory, but we add it. We test it, we address the shortcomings, we test again, there's a shortcoming, new things emerging, because the media landscape has changed, human nature changes, the world changes, so we keep updating it. But ultimately, science is built on deductive reasoning because you need to have a theory that could explain whatever phenomenon you're investigating. Because remember, we said theory means an established explanation or like how two things go together. So this is an example of inductive reasoning. So a study looked at COVID-19 cases associated with workplace outbreaks in certain industries in Utah. Found that Hispanic and non-white workers made up 73% of those cases, despite representing just 24% of the workforce. Right, so the Hispanic and non-white populations were disproportionately hit. That simple observation led the authors to propose, or at least the reporter, to say systemic social inequalities have resulted in overrepresentation for Hispanic and non-white workers. were exposed to SARS or like COVID-19 or SARS COVID SARS-2 is high. So here in that, the data itself only shows that there's a disproportionality. The part about systemic social inequities is the proposed hypothesis after collecting the facts, right? So it's only a hypothesis based on observation. The data yet at this stage does not support or disprove that claim. There are other studies that are needed, right? But at the final stage, you're only observing what you see in front of you. If you remember when you talked about exploratory, you're just exploring the reality, but you're not yet explaining why those things are happening, like why two variables are correlated. Here, you observe some inequities. You came up, or the researcher came up with one explanation. That explanation has not been tested yet in different outcomes. No round of data is needed. So this stage is only like it's part of like this, which we only call it descriptive research versus inductive research, right? So let's talk about like let's say there is a different research question. So you're researching how citizens aged 18 to 24 feel about the proposed 400 check from the federal government, which is about to pass, by the way, if you follow the news, or probably not. Particularly want to see the level of support and whether there are differences along gender, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups. So in other words, which groups are more enthusiastic about the checks and which groups are more eager to spend them and or maybe or just in how they're going to spend them, right? So the research question here is, I think it's pretty much straightforward. I have a question for you to discuss. Do you know what subgroup would be the most enthusiastic about the checks? Any guesses?
I would think maybe younger people because there's less like responsibilities maybe you have to cover, so the money is more like at free will to spend.
So you're saying younger people because they have, but you say they have more responsibility.
They like you don't have like like less younger people have like bills or like there's more like exciting ways you probably could spend your money because you have less responsibilities that money would need to go towards.
All right. So you're saying, let me rephrase what Crispy said. So you're saying $1,400 would do more for younger people than other groups. Like it would be more significant because like it could be pay your rent, pay your bills, right?
Yeah, maybe just like more exciting ways you would spend it.
Yeah. Yeah. Who's Anis? Yeah.
I was thinking maybe like people of lower income or like working middle class people, just because they need the money more, so they might be more enthusiastic about it.
Yeah. So and it's saying it could be people from lower socioeconomic groups because they need the money more. Why do you think then? Why do you think people who are so? If I ask, why do you? Let me put it simply. So people with less money would be more excited about getting money. That's what you were saying?
Yeah, I'm also kind of saying like the working class, just because their jobs are like they work is a lot, so their jobs are most affected by COVID because they're shut.
Mm-hmm.
So I would
Mhm.
assume that they would need the money more.
Okay. So yeah, so people who were affected more that the pandemic and closures and loss of employment would be more excited about the okay. Um, so here, just from two individuals, what Grace and Anis were doing, they were offering hypotheses or hunches. So so you don't know actually, you're just guessing. But those guesses were informed by basic assumptions you have about human beings and human nature and how people react to things. So for example, one hypothesis is that uh, because younger people would feel like directly affected by the checks. In other words, they won't go like into it's not that they have too much responsibilities or people they're responsible for, so they would spend the money on them. The $400 would affect young people directly, so they would feel more excited about it. They don't have a lot to spend on anyways. So if I gave you guys all, I as in the federal government, if you all $1,400, yeah, you exactly know where you're going to spend it, so you'd be excited, right? So gonna pay the rent or like pay your car insurance, you name it, right? And so you'd be super excited, right? It's not like a drop in an ocean for you. Uh, Not you directly. I mean you as young people in America, right? And it's so that's one assumption about human nature, and that assumption then would guide Grace and others uh, to propose reactions to different things. So reactions to different policies, reactions to different campaigns, reaction to different channels, reaction to different shows. So if the issue is more relevant to you and to your situation, right, you will feel more excited about it. The issue relevance predicts enthusiasm. That's actually, even if you don't think of it this way, it's actually a theoretical framework, right? If Annis say, actually people who are losing jobs are more excited. So it's more about the livelihood. So it's saying the larger the felt impact, the more enthusiastic the person would become. It's more situational. So probably across age groups and across gender lines and across ethnic lines, people who've lost their jobs would be more enthusiastic. So that's actually a different theory, right? So there's a different theory that uh, you're trying to predict how people would react. Uh, Then I have a question for you. Is it always the case that people with less income are always supportive of government assistance? Is that always true? Out of Okay, some people are not saying it's not. Could someone? So Eric, you were skeptical. It it looks like you don't think that's the case. Why do you think that?
Well, I imagine some people would see it as, uh, would be worried about the stigma that comes with it, or would see it as, a handout or basically help that they don't need. That they can take care of themselves. They don't need extra help, and they're worried about the stigma that comes with it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it could be. So here's a third theory. It could be that there are psychological barriers to be receptive to government assistance, or like some ideological barriers. So if because it's a handout that did not come from any sort of an effort or job program, for some people it would feel wrong to ask for it, could be, or like they won't express enthusiasm about it, or they won't feel right, so they would leave them sitting on their accounts. They won't really push for it, right? So even if they need the money, it doesn't sit right with them that the government, for psychological reasons, for philosophical reasons, for ideological reasons, for political reasons, you name it, that they're just getting handouts, right? So this is an alternative hypothesis. So it could be right. So people in need are more supportive of government assistance, but there are also some psychological and ideological moderators to that statement. So that's what we mean by hypothesis. If you're conducting your research just trying to see what happens, it's only inductive. Those theories that the three students have shared, you're coming to research, and then you would design your research to confirm or disconfirm those assumptions. Then it would become deductive reasoning. So you see the difference here between like the two things, right? So you build assumptions, you research. And deductive reasoning supposedly can be based on previous research. So suppose we did a research on, so we had a survey on how people have spent their $1,200 COVID check back in April. Yes. And we reported the difference based on socioeconomic age and ethnic group. And we presented how the different groups spend their money. So how fast did each group spend their money? What did they spend their money on? How much was left in their account, if any, things like that. So we have the data. Based on this data, we could predict which group will be most eager to receive the $1,400 check, right? Because now we have actual data, and we see, okay, like this subgroup. So let's say people 25 to 34 with it, like who are single parents, spend the money like the fastest, like 2 days it will come. We're assuming, yeah, those people will be the most eager to spend it based on that, right? Because that need did not go away. This at stage 2, the new research we're conducting will be based on will be considered deductive research, or will be based on deductive reasoning. Because we have a hypothesis based on previous empirical findings that we are going to test with a new round of data. So you see that? So there's, assuming we did the research in the past, we didn't have, so back at stage 1, we didn't have a hypothesis. At stage 2, we actually do, right? And so you can see here, if you're coming in like a fresh topic, your research by nature will be inductive. Once you having a repetition, it will become deductive. So I hope you can see the relationship between how one is built on the other. Here's an example of deductive reasoning. So if we say this is an actual study, so the hypothesis was the presence of soundtrack music matching a game characteristic. So if it's an action game, then you would have an action-like music, right? Will have a positive effect on players' enjoyment because of the intensified emotion, right? So this is a hypothesis the researcher proposed before even conducting the data analysis. We're doing the data. So here, looking at this hypothesis, what is the cause? What is causing players' engagement? So, according to the hypothesis, what will cause players' engagement during playtime? Yes, Emily, you want to say something? Oh, not? Okay, so you're raising your hand. So it's on there. So what is causing players' enjoyment?
Is it the soundtrack?
Right. So the soundtrack. So if you have a soundtrack, the players will enjoy the game more. And so, Terrence, why you think the researcher are basing what the researcher are basing their assumption on? Why do they think the soundtrack will increase the players' enjoyment?
Because it had a positive effect on the player's enjoyment.
Yeah, but why is that? How it's going to affect enjoyment? What's the reason that soundtrack increases enjoyment?
Because it matched the game's characteristics.
So if you have a soundtrack, so let me ask you, you have a, imagine you're playing a game, right? Who raised their hand?
Because
Yeah, Shiana, yeah.
it'll intensify their emotions.
Right. So you're playing, so now imagine you're playing a video game, right? If you having, what's the difference if you play with soundtrack or without a soundtrack? This hypothesis is saying having a soundtrack will increase the player's enjoyment. That's what we mean by a positive effect, right? It will increase players' enjoyment. And the reason or the explanation that's going to increase players' enjoyment is that it will intensify emotions. So the game will be more tense when there's damn music, right? So imagine you're playing. What do people play in here? Do we have gamers in the room? Yes,
Call of Duty
no.
Mobile.
Yes, the Call of Duty Mobile. Okay, and that's the game with the soundtrack music, right? Okay. So assuming, okay, that's a good example. What's the difference when you play that game with the soundtrack on, or when you play on mute? What's the difference when you play? So when you play on mute.
Oh, when it's mute, you can't hear if people are coming, and it's not as fun. But when the music gets intense, it's like you're more invested in the game.
Okay. So what Diana is saying, when it's more intense, you get more engagement. So your whole brain and body will be into the game. You pay attention. It really gets you into that. What we call like the traveling across the screen. There's like that meta engagement, right? The game, the music basically puts you in that mood or mode, as they say, and then so you'll be more invested. You will identify more, and so because you are mentally more invested and emotionally more invested, that increases like the level of like dopamine or adrenaline in your brain, hence more junk. Does that make sense? Is that relatable? Okay. All right. So that's the point. what this is a theory, right? And the researcher based their assumption on previous research. So here they're just stating, as if it's already known, that music intensify emotions, right? So now forget about games. Okay, so you're just listening to whatever you're working out. Let's say that's actually a better example. I should have used it. So work. How many of you can work out without having their headphones on or without listening to any music? How many of you can do that? I see a lot of no's. Okay. Have you ever thought why? Like, you can just work out. You don't need to listen to music. Why do you have to listen to music?
It pumps you up.
Yeah, okay, it pumps you up, but okay, it pumps you up, but so you cannot just self-motivate.
It makes it more enjoyable when you get to choose like what you're listening to when you're going through, I guess, struggle at some point.
Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. Yeah, so it eases, or the intensifies the struggle also, like, yeah. So why can't we, and I include myself in it, why can't we just, work out? So, assumingly we're using different parts of our bodies in the workout other than our ears, so it should have no relation. But the thing is, what Gianna was saying, like if you think of it, you need some explanation. And an explanation could be that, yes, well, first of all, it distracts you from the pain and struggle. So if you at least put part of your mind into something else, you're listening to music, okay, you're just not thinking about, how like what your thighs are trying to fill your brain or whatnot, right? So it takes that part away. It also there's the loss of time, right? You're not keeping track of time. Like, okay, you're listening to music, you're thinking about that, and then so 1 hour could pass, 2 hours could pass without you feeling the weight of time, right? It's also about pumping you up. That's the intensifying emotion part. So it is excited, your heartbeat goes up, feel more fun, and so it lifts up your spirit, and so it has something to do with your emotions, which help you in your physical ordeal. Okay, uh, so that is could be based on what we know about music. So there are people, aside from video games and exercise, who study what music does to the brain or know the effect. So if you go to Google, the effect of music on mood, there are like tons and tons of articles about that. Okay, there are tons of articles about how music increases mental engagement, right? So if you already know this body of research, you're aware of it. If you're studying video games, you're just going to apply that to the new settings. And we know that music pumps people up, right? So it, that should be true on video games, just should be true on exercises, just should be true for performance, for political rallies. Sometimes you see them that they play some uplifting music in the background, right? That should be applied. It's all just a different context. And so to answer my earlier question in the second slide, like how do I propose hypothesis? This is how you propose hypothesis. You look at the simple components and then ask yourself, what do we already know about this? What things do we already know about the effects of music that will guide us to answer the question, what's the effect of music on video games enjoyment, right? Or what is the thing that keep people less distracted, right? And so here, that's how people pose hypotheses. You look at previous research, deductive reasoning, like existing theories, and then based on that, you propose new hypotheses or new contexts or new topics of investigation. So I hope that clarifies things. I hope this is simpler. So so here's the research. So this is deductive reasoning also. So does mobile use on bed affect your sleep? So using your cell phone before going to sleep while we're on bed is arguably one of the factors that lead you to have poor quality of your sleep. So you would sleep less, and even if you sleep the same amount, you won't get what they call the deep sleeping phase, right? So it would be more like a poor sleep quality, right? So using cell phones in bed leads to poor sleep quality, right? So that was a hypothesis, all right? They compared two groups. So one group, they asked one group of participants, don't use your cell phone. The other group of participants, use their cell phones, right? So participants who did not use smartphones showed small improvements in happiness and quality of life after a week. They started to feel better mentally, all right? Okay, so what is the cause? What is causing poor sleep quality in here? What is causing poor sleep quality?
Cell phone use before bed.
Okay, cell phone use before bed. Why do you think that? What's the reason? What's your guess? Why is this happening?
Just because that was the manipulated independent variable, whether the group was using their phone in their bedroom or not.
Okay, that's technically speaking, but I'm thinking about the rationale. Like, why would then mobile use? Why did
just because maybe it's as like a stimulant, a visual stimulant or a brain stimulant right before you're trying to go to bed. It could be hard for your brain to see that and then shut down and go to sleep after.
Okay, so a visual stimulant or a brain stimulant. Is there a difference between the two? So what is a visual stimulant? What is a visual stimulant and what is a brain stimulant? Or is it the same thing?
I think I just meant them as the same idea.
Okay. There's someone, okay, any other guesses? Why would cell phones make our sleeping really terrible? Why? What is it about?
I'm guessing that the exposure to light at hours that our natural body clock isn't used to can change our release of melatonin, thus inhibiting our sleep cycle.
Yeah, that was impressive. Okay, so it sounded scientific. So yeah, it could be about the light. So looking at that screen as this lady in the picture is showing, so looking at that light, which sends the wrong signals to your brain to produce or like to block the production of melatonin. The melatonin, like the sleeping like enzyme in our bodies, or just keeping our brains alerted, so we cannot go to sleep. So that's one. So it's about the light. But if that's the case, is there a difference between just the regular lamp light and the cell phone light? So Gianna, you say you're not. You're saying yes. So what's the difference?
Um, it's just like a natural light versus like an artificial light.
Okay, okay. So it's something specifically about the cell phone light, not the natural light, the cell phone light. That's something wrong to the brain, right? That's that's how the theory goes. Right? So it's something about the cell phone light that's keeping our brains more alerted, even in comparison to the sunlight. Did this experiment study that the comparison between sunlight and cell phone light? Just based on what you see. So yeah, so it did not. So we don't know. So we don't know if if light is the factor, right? Going back to Zoe's point, so mental stimulant. How do smartphones keep our brains stimulated? Uh, what do we see on smartphones? What things we do on smartphones? Could anyone share what they do in their cell phones before they go to bed? Like, okay, what do people do in their cell phones?
Go on social media.
Okay, going on social media. So what about social media that would keep our brains alerted or stimulated? So what do you see on social media? That's what I'm asking.
Like pictures and videos and information.
Right, right. So it could be then that the materials we see on social media is what's keeping our brains alerted, so we cannot go to sleep, right? Okay. So here we have two competing hypotheses. It could be the light for the cell phone, or it could be the uses and materials we see on the cell phone, right? But if we use our laptops for social media or like something else, we should see the same effect. And if we use the cell phone even without logging into social media, just be the presence of the mere light, we should also see the same effect. But these are two competing theories. So you see here, same phenomena, same data, but you could come up with different explanation of why that's happening. So that leads us to, So that leads us to explain how causality is difficult because in order to prove causality, we need three things. So first of all, you need a time order. So the cause happened before the effect. Technically, this is present in this study. So people were asked to look at their phones, and then they measured their sleep quality. The people were asked not to look at their phones, and then they measured sleep quality. So we had that. There's an association between changes in the predictor and changes in the outcome variable. We have that, right? So when their cell phone use changed, the sleeping patterns or the life quality changed, right? So we had that. The causal explanation is not rivaled by another equally valid or stronger explanation. Okay. Have we settled on one explanation for this finding in here? Do we know what the real explanation is? So no, we don't know. So it could be the light, could be social media. So it ultimately might not be smartphones. So any light similar to smartphone lights could lead to the same effects. Any device that you go into social media with could have the same effect. Any material that give you like mental stimulants, so even a radio show or a book or a video game would have the same effect. From this study, just from what I'm sharing with you here, we cannot tell. So that study, believe it or not, even though they are showing significant results, did not establish causality. They're only showing an association, right? Um, and we are about to finish, so don't worry. So here's another example. So one study found there's an association between the frequency of observing thin ideal bodies and reported body dissatisfaction. Okay. So is there a positive relationship between the two things? Okay. So did you get what the hypothesis says? So people who observe thin ideal bodies, let's say on social media or magazines, tend to report higher levels of body dissatisfaction, right? So there's an association. Cool, right? Okay, so that's one, there's an association. Is there a time order? Read the statement carefully. Is there a time order? So I'm asking which one comes first.
The observation.
Did I say that or are you just assuming? Does the statement say that or are you just assuming?
That's, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yeah, so it's an assembly, right? Like it is tricky in purpose. So it could be that the opposite is true. So yeah, people would intuitively tend to think that observing thin bodies on social media, let's say, which cause them to feel dissatisfied with their bodies. But it could also be that people who are insecure, or just as a trait, insecure about their bodies, would tend then to go to social media and follow people with like thin ideal bodies. Right? Those are two plausible explanations. Doesn't matter which one you feel closer to, but those are all just explanations you're coming up with, hypotheses. Okay? But just seeing an association that the two things are going up together doesn't mean that you've established which one caused what, right? So you need a time order, you need an association. So showing association is the easiest part. Time order, you could do it by experiment, but then ruling out alternative explanations is always the hardest, as you saw with the cell phone example. And so that's the a problem with causal research, and that's a problem what we call correlation. It's not causation. Sure, you heard that phrase before, right? So this is an actual correlation. So if we see there's an association between an increase in ice cream sales and in reported shark attacks. So you can see during the summer, so May, June, July, August, September, and it peaks and even goes down. We see an uptake in ice cream sales and an uptake on shark attacks, right? Does that mean buying ice creams lead sharks to attack beachgoers? Is there a logical association between the two? So yes, no, okay? But the two things could be caused by a third thing, as you can see. So hot weather leads people to buy ice creams, and hot weather leads people to go to the beach. And because those two things coincide, we would see that they would go up together. But it doesn't mean that one is causing the other. It's actually like the two happen to be caused by a third option, or a third variable. So So you can see having an association or correlation does not automatically translate into causation because there are more logical explanations for that association, right? You cannot make a logical connection between ice cream sales and sharks. If you want, you can try and convince them. So that's, I think that's explain, yeah, what's the difference between causation and causation. That's it for today. Do you have any questions? Cool. So final thing before you leave. So I updated assignment 1. I'm adding the articles that I'm asking you to pick from. Just now, I'll add them now once I close this conversation. On Monday and on Wednesday, we'll talk more in details about the assignment 1, so you will have time to work on it and finish it, right? And yeah, and if you have questions about it later, you can talk to me. Okay. Okay. Cool. Have a good one, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm new to the class.